Alright, this will be our first video for APUSH on Friday, April 10th. We didn't have one yesterday on the 9th. So this will be wrapping up this week's notes. We just finished up talking about the Kansas-Nebraska Act and got into a little bit of the Compton Constitution, all that. So we're going to look at some more of the aftermath of this and the road to the Civil War. Alright, so we're on PDF page 168. The events in Kansas further polarized the nation. The passions raised were even reflected in Congress when Preston Brooks, nephew of pro-slavery Senator Andrew Butler, savagely beat abolitionist Senator Charles Sumner on the head with a cane for a speech in which Sumner attacked the South and Butler, using lewd metaphors about slavery. The crisis destroyed Pierce's political career, and the Democrats chose James Buchanan as their 1856 candidate. Buchanan's greatest political asset was that he had been out of the country for the previous 4 years, and so he could avoid blame for the disastrous results of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. In a sectional vote, Buchanan won the election, carrying the South, while the North split between Buchanan and Republican John Fremont. The Know-Nothings ran Millard Fillmore, who had won 20% of the vote. It was the Know-Nothings' last hurrah, and a lot of those Know-Nothings would end up going to the Republican Party. Okay, Buchanan, Dred Scott, election of 1860. As president, James Buchanan tried to maintain the status quo. He worked to enforce the Fugitive Slave Act and oppose abolitionist activism in the South and West. Like many of the nation's leaders at the time, he was at a loss when it came to a permanent solution to the question of slavery. He had hoped merely to maintain the Union until a solution presented itself. 2 days after Buchanan took office, the crisis over slavery escalated when the Supreme Court ruled in Dred Scott versus Sanford. Scott, a former slave whose master had taken him to territories where slavery was illegal, declared himself a free man and sued for his freedom. Scott won the case but lost the appeal, and the case finally wound up in the Supreme Court, where Scott lost. At a time when many wanted to ignore the big questions surrounding slavery, Chief Justice Roger Taney, who wrote the majority decision, chose to attack them head-on. Taney's one-sided pro-slavery decision declared that slaves were property, not citizens, and further that no black person could ever be a citizen in the United States. Because blacks were not citizens, Taney argued they could not sue in federal courts, as Scott had done. Moreover, he ruled that Congress could not regulate slavery in the territories, as it had done passing the Northwest Ordinance in 1787, under the Articles of Confederation, government, and again in 1820 with the Missouri Compromise. This part of the decision not only nullified the now obsolete Missouri Compromise, but also the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and a rule that out any hope of reviving the Wilmot Proviso, which was still championed by many Northerners and abolitionists. In exercising judicial review and declaring the Missouri Compromise unconstitutional, Taney and the court were in essence saying that slavery could go anywhere. The Republicans' goal of preventing the spread of slavery into the new territories was destroyed by the court's ruling. The Dred Scott decision was thus a major victory for Southerners and a turning point in the decade of crisis. Essentially, it made a lot of people galvanize around the Republican Party, like free soilers and the like, and they all joined one party together, making them stronger. In the North, the Supreme Court decision was viciously denounced. Even those who had lacked strong abolitionist sentiments feared that the decision tilted the balance of power too far in the South's favor. Many, including the press, regarded the decision as a further proof of slave power that, if left unchecked, would soon dominate the entire country, perhaps even forcing slavery on the states that it did not want it. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party was dividing along regional lines, raising the possibility that Republicans might soon control the national government. 1858 was an off-year election, and it was in the politically charged atmosphere that the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates took place. Students often think the debates were for the presidential election, but they weren't. Douglas faced stiff competition for the Illinois Senate seat from Abraham Lincoln, a rising star in the newly formed Republican Party. The race for Illinois Senate seat gained national attention in part because of the railroad and telegraph. Stephen Douglas was viewed as the leading Democrat in the United States Senate, while Lincoln had gained his reputation as a Whig opposed to the Mexican-American War and the Kansas-Nebraska Act. In many ways, the Lincoln-Douglas debates gave voice to the issues and the concepts that divided a nation heading for civil war. It was in this campaign that Lincoln delivered his famous speech, "House divided, a nation divided against itself cannot stand." While Douglas destroyed his political career in an attempt to defend popular sovereignty, what became known as the Freeport Doctrine. Douglas tried to depict Lincoln as an abolitionist, but Lincoln skillfully backed Douglas into a corner when he pushed him to reconcile popular sovereignty with the Dred Scott decision. Douglas suggested that slavery could not exist where local laws are not protected. In essence, he contended voters and residents of a territory could exclude slavery simply by not protecting a man's property. Douglas alienated both Northern and Southern voters by his ambiguous stance on popular sovereignty and effectively destroyed any chance he might have had for winning the presidency in 1860. Adding fuel to the secessionist fire was John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry in 1859. Brown hoped to spark a slave revolt but failed. After his execution, news spread that Brown had received financial backing from Northern abolition organizations. Brown became a martyr for the cause, celebrated throughout the North. When it came time for the Democrats to choose their 1860 presidential candidate, their convention split. Northern Democrats backed Douglas, Southerners backed John Breckinridge. The election showed that the nation itself was on the brink of fracture. In the North, the contest was between Douglas and Republican nominee Abraham Lincoln. In the South, Breckinridge faced off against Constitutional Union Party nominee John Bell. Lincoln didn't even appear on the Southern ballots. But the North held the majority of electoral votes, so when Lincoln achieved a clean sweep there, he won the election. The response in the Southern legislatures was to propose bills of secession. Immediately after the election, Southern leaders who wanted to maintain the Union tried to negotiate and came up with the Crittenden Compromise. All hope of resolution died, however, when Lincoln refused to soften the Republican demand that slavery not be extended to the territories. Lincoln probably had no other political option, as to do otherwise would have been to abandon the principles of those who had supported his election. Lincoln and other Northern leaders were banking on the hope that the South was bluffing and would not secede. In December of 1860, 3 months before Lincoln's inauguration, South Carolina seceded from the Union. Within months, 6 other states had joined South Carolina to form the Confederate States of America. The states chose Jefferson Davis to lead the Confederacy. Cautiously, Lincoln decided to maintain control of federal forts in the South while waiting for the Confederacy to make a move. On April 12, 1861, it did, attacking and capturing Fort Sumter. No one died in this first-time battle of America's bloodiest war, the Civil War. All right, so now we're going into the Civil War and eventually Reconstruction. For many people of the era, the Civil War was not solely or even explicitly about slavery. It was worth noting that Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware, the border states, were slave states that fought for the Union. Except for active abolitionists, most Northerners believed that they were fighting to preserve the Union. Most Southerners described their cause as fighting for their states' rights to govern themselves. But slavery was the issue that had caused the argument over states' rights to escalate to war. Lincoln's views on slavery evolved throughout the 1850s and the Civil War, but as late as 1862, Lincoln stated, "If I could save the Union without freeing any slaves, I would do it. And if I could save the Union by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. What I do about slavery and the colored race, I do because I believe it helps to save the Union." The Civil War took place not only on the battlefields, but also in political, economic, and social realms. Although you do not need to know the military details of any specific battles for the AP exam, you should know the political or diplomatic consequences of battles like Gettysburg or Antietam, and you do need to know how political, social, and economic conditions influence the outcome of the war. All right, Civil War and the Confederacy. Ironically, the Southern states fought to maintain the right to govern themselves locally. The Confederate government brought them under greater central control than they had ever experienced. Jefferson Davis understood that North's considerable advantages in population, transportation, and economics, and he knew that the weak, poorly organized state governments of the South could not mount an effective defense. Davis took control of the Southern economy, imposing taxes and using the revenues to spur industrial and urban growth. He took control of the railroads and commercial shipping. He created a large government bureaucracy to oversee economic developments. Davis, in short, forced the South to compensate quickly for what it had lost when it cut itself off from Northern commerce. When Southerners opposed his moves, he declared martial law and suspended the writ of habeas corpus, a traditional protection against improper imprisonment, in order to maintain control. Lincoln was upsetting Northerners with some of the exact same steps, but the use of presidential power chafed especially badly in the Confederacy, where many believed they had seceded precisely to avoid the federal government commanding too much power. Davis had some success in modernizing the Southern economy, but the Confederacy lagged too far behind industrialization to catch up to the Union. Rapid economic growth furthermore brought with it rapid inflation. Prices rose so quickly that paychecks and payments for crops became worthless almost as soon as they were made, plunging many Southerners into poverty. In 1862, the Confederacy imposed conscription, or drafting, requiring many small farmers to serve in the Confederate Army. This act caused even greater poverty in the country, as many families could not adequately tend their farms without their men. All right, we'll stop the video 1 there.